How did the Brezhnev Doctrine compare to other Soviet policies? If you're curious about how the Brezhnev Doctrine fit into the broader landscape of Soviet policies, you're about to uncover some fascinating insights. Let's break it down step by step. The Brezhnev Doctrine, introduced in 1968 by Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev, was a specific policy aimed at maintaining Soviet control over Eastern European communist countries. Unlike other Soviet policies that focused on internal affairs or global diplomacy, the Brezhnev Doctrine was uniquely centered on ensuring the stability and loyalty of Soviet satellite states. One key aspect that sets the Brezhnev Doctrine apart is its emphasis on military intervention. Whenever a Soviet satellite state showed signs of liberalization or deviation from strict communist principles, the Soviet Union would intervene militarily to restore order. This was vividly demonstrated during the Prague Spring in Czechoslovakia in 1968, where Soviet forces invaded to quash reforms and reinstate a hardline communist government. In contrast, earlier Soviet policies under Joseph Stalin were more focused on internal purges and the consolidation of power within the Soviet Union itself. Stalin's Great Purge, for example, targeted Communist Party leaders and other perceived enemies of the state, but it did not involve the same level of external intervention as the Brezhnev Doctrine. Under Nikita Khrushchev, who preceded Brezhnev, Soviet policies began to shift towards a more relaxed approach, known as de-Stalinization. This period saw some degree of liberalization and a reduction in the use of force against Soviet citizens. However, Khrushchev's policies did not extend the same level of leniency to Eastern European states, and interventions like the Hungarian Revolution in 1956 still occurred. The Brezhnev Doctrine also differed from later Soviet policies under Mikhail Gorbachev. Gorbachev introduced reforms such as glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring, which marked a significant departure from the rigid control and military intervention of the Brezhnev era. Gorbachev's policies led to the eventual abandonment of the Brezhnev Doctrine and the peaceful transition of Eastern European countries towards democracy. In terms of its impact, the Brezhnev Doctrine was more restrictive than other Soviet policies. It severely limited the independence of Eastern European communist states, forcing them to adhere strictly to Soviet-defined socialist principles. This was in stark contrast to the more flexible approach of later years, where Soviet influence waned and Eastern European countries were allowed greater autonomy. To sum it up, the Brezhnev Doctrine was a unique policy within the Soviet repertoire, characterized by its aggressive stance on maintaining control over Eastern Europe through military intervention. It stood out from other Soviet policies in its focus on external control and its rigid enforcement of communist orthodoxy.